India Monroe had always believed that love could mend the fractures life had carved into her. When she accepted Preston Ashford's proposal, she thought she'd finally found the peace she'd been chasing her entire life. The night she drove to his family's mansion in Connecticut, she believed she was entering a dream. But dreams can be deceptive. They wear the same mask as nightmares until it's too late to tell them apart. The Ashford estate rose out of the mist like a monument to old money and quiet power. Stone walls glimmered under the driveway lights, and the hedges were trimmed with surgical precision. India's hands trembled on the steering wheel of her aging Honda Civic. She felt like she was crossing into another world, one where she didn't belong. Preston stood at the top of the steps, smiling the way he always did, warm and reassuring. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Everything's going to be fine. They'll love you as much as I do." India wanted to believe him. She always wanted to believe him. Dinner that night was beautiful, elegant, and suffocating. The Ashfords sat around a table built for 20, but there were only 5 of them, and the distance between each plate felt deliberate. Margaret Ashford, Preston's mother, sat at the head like a queen evaluating an unworthy guest. Her questions were sharp, cloaked in politeness. "Where exactly did you grow up? What does your family do?" When India explained that she'd grown up in foster care and didn't know her biological parents, Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line that said everything her words didn't. Clarissa, Preston's sister, was worse. Every compliment was a jab. "Your dress is so urban chic," she'd said, smirking. She talked about Paris, Milan, and the Hamptons, not because India cared, but because she wanted her to feel small. Every word left a paper cut, small enough to be dismissed, sharp enough to draw blood. Only Harrison Ashford, the family patriarch and CEO of Ashford Pharmaceuticals, seemed remotely kind. He listened as India spoke about her work as a social worker in Detroit. For a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, recognition, or guilt, but it vanished before she could name it. Preston tried to ease the tension, offering her gentle smiles across the table, but he never once stood up to his family. He let the little cruelties slide, pretending they were just misunderstandings. India swallowed her disappointment. It was one dinner. Things would get better once they were married. That's what she told herself, as she lay in the cold guest room that night, surrounded by luxury that made her feel like a trespasser. At 3 a.m., she woke to use the bathroom. The house was silent except for the faint hum of distant machinery. As she passed the staircase, she heard voices, male voices, low and tense. Curiosity and unease twisted together in her chest. She crept downstairs, barefoot, guided by the thin slice of golden light spilling from a cracked door at the end of the hall. The study. India pressed herself to the wall and looked through the gap. Harrison Ashford sat behind a massive mahogany desk, counting stacks of $100 bills. Preston stood nearby, pale and silent. But it wasn't the money that froze India's blood. It was the photograph on the desk. A young black woman smiled out from the frame, wearing a white lab coat, her eyes bright with hope. India's breath caught in her throat. The woman had her eyes, her nose, her same widow's peak. On the desk beside the photo was a manila folder labeled Detroit Foster System, 1997-2012. Those were her years. Her life. Her hand rose to her mouth, but a soft gasp escaped before she could stop it. Both men turned sharply toward the door. For a heartbeat, none of them moved. Then India stepped forward, trembling but resolute. "Who is she?" she whispered, pointing at the photograph. Harrison's face drained of color. Preston's lips parted, but no words came out. Then came the sound of heels clicking against marble. Margaret Ashford appeared, calm, composed, every hair in place. "Well," she said coolly, "I suppose there's no point in waiting until after the wedding." Clarissa followed her in, eyes glinting with cruel satisfaction. "Sit down, dear," Margaret said. "We have a great deal to discuss." India didn't move. She could barely breathe. "Tell me," she demanded. "Who is that woman?" Harrison hesitated, then spoke. "Her name is Diane Monroe. She was your mother." India felt the floor tilt beneath her. "I know who my mother was," she said, though she knew so little. "What I want to know is why you have her picture. Why you have files on me." Margaret sighed, as though explaining a minor inconvenience. "Your mother worked for Ashford Pharmaceuticals 28 years ago. She was a lab technician, talented but unstable. She became convinced that one of our drug trials was unsafe." "She wasn't unstable," Harrison interrupted quietly. Margaret's glare silenced him. "She threatened to go public," Margaret continued. "Her accusations were unfounded, but they would have ruined us. We had to protect the company. We terminated her employment and made sure she couldn't find work elsewhere." India's heart pounded. "You destroyed her life because she tried to tell the truth." "We protected thousands of jobs," Margaret snapped. "What happened to her afterward wasn't our fault." "She killed herself," India whispered. "Because you took everything from her. And then I went into foster care." Clarissa shrugged. "We gave her a generous severance. She made her own choices." India turned to Preston, her voice breaking. You knew all of this." He couldn't look at her. "I didn't at first," he said softly. "When we met, I had no idea. But once my mother investigated you, she found out. She asked me to keep seeing you, to make sure you didn't dig too deep. She asked you to seduce me," India said, her voice trembling, "to lie to me." "At first, maybe," he whispered. "But I fell in love with you. I swear I did. You were asking questions about your mother again, and we? She cut him off. "You mean they." He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. Margaret opened a drawer and pulled out a leather portfolio. "Here's what's going to happen," she said briskly. "You'll take this check for $2 million, sign the non-disclosure agreement, and disappear. Quietly, dignified. Just as your mother should have done." India stared at the check. $2 million. It was everything she'd ever dreamed of, and nothing she wanted. Clarissa smirked. "Who would believe you anyway? A foster kid from Detroit versus one of the most powerful families in Connecticut? We own half this state. Judges, journalists, politicians, they all owe us." India turned to Harrison. "You knew the drug was dangerous, didn't you?" He closed his eyes. "Yes, it caused birth defects. But pulling it would have bankrupted us. Your mother wanted to expose everything. I wish she hadn't. I'm sorry, India, truly. But this is business." India's voice went cold. "You don't get to buy your way out of murder." She ripped the engagement ring off her finger and threw it at Preston. It bounced across the carpet like a bullet. "Security," Margaret said into the intercom. 2 men in suits appeared and escorted India upstairs. They watched as she packed her bag, then led her out into the breaking dawn. She drove away with tears streaming down her face, and the photograph of her mother clutched to her chest. By the time she reached Detroit, something inside her had hardened. She called her old mentor, Jerome Phillips, a former investigative journalist who now worked at her agency. When she told him everything, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "If you fight this, they'll come at you with everything they have." "My mother tried to tell the truth, and it killed her," India said. "I won't let that happen again." Together they started digging. India tracked down anyone who'd known her mother, co-workers, friends, anyone who might remember. Eventually she found Gladys Chen, her mother's old friend, living in a nursing home. When India showed her the photograph, the woman's eyes filled with tears. "Diane," she whispered, "I was wondering when someone would come." Gladys led them to a storage unit her mother had rented decades ago under Gladys's name. Inside were boxes of documents, recordings, and emails, proof of everything Diane had uncovered: false reports, suppressed data, evidence of a massive cover-up. India sat on the cold floor, clutching the papers, sobbing. Her mother hadn't been delusional. She'd been brave, and she'd died for it. But India also understood the cost of exposing it. Thousands of innocent employees could lose their livelihoods. Destroying the company wouldn't bring justice. It would only create new victims. So she took a different path. She contacted the FDA, the Department of Justice, and a handful of journalists she trusted. She didn't want revenge. She wanted accountability. What followed was a storm. Investigations, trials, congressional hearings. India testified, telling her mother's story to the world. Harrison Ashford, facing life in prison, agreed to testify against his wife. Preston was arrested for his role in attempting to silence India. Clarissa fled to Europe, her name forever stained. The world finally saw the truth that Diane Monroe had died trying to reveal. 6 months later, India received a call. The new board of Ashford Pharmaceuticals wanted her to return, not as a victim, but as a leader. The company had been restructured under federal oversight. They needed someone who could rebuild it with integrity. India accepted. On her first day, she stood in her office, the same building where her mother had once worked in obscurity. She placed the photograph of Diane on her desk and slipped into her mother's old lab coat, its fabric soft from time but heavy with meaning. Jerome visited with coffee and a smile. "Your mother would be proud," he said. "You turned pain into purpose." India looked out over the city. "She taught me that truth doesn't die," she said. "It just waits for someone brave enough to speak it." Under her leadership, the company created the Monroe Protocol, a revolutionary standard for clinical trial transparency and whistleblower protection. Families affected by the defective drug finally received compensation. Harrison Ashford was sentenced to 8 years. Margaret received 15 for corporate manslaughter. Preston served 3, and when he was released, he tried to reach out once, but India never answered. Instead, she founded the Diane Monroe Foundation, a nonprofit supporting foster youth who wanted to pursue science and advocacy. She converted the Ashford mansion, the same house where she'd been humiliated and betrayed, into a trauma recovery center for families affected by medical negligence. India walked through those halls, one last time before opening day. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, washing the marble floors in gold. For the first time, the house felt alive, reborn. She paused in the study, the room where everything had shattered. The desk was gone, replaced by a circle of chairs for counseling sessions. She ran her hand along the wall and smiled softly. "They tried to bury her truth," she whispered, "but they planted a seed instead." As she left, she thought of her mother, of all the nights Diane must have spent terrified but determined, of how her courage had rippled through time, turning her daughter into the woman who would finish what she started. Justice wasn't about destruction. It was about transformation, taking the same system that tried to silence you and making it answer for its sins. India Monroe didn't burn the empire down. She rebuilt it, one truth at a time. And in that quiet, powerful act of defiance, she won. Months passed, and the world slowly began to forget the name Ashford as a symbol of corruption. Under India's leadership, the company became something new, something honest. Reporters who had once written about scandal now wrote about reform. Former employees who'd been ashamed to admit where they worked started speaking with pride again. But for India, redemption came with a quiet kind of loneliness. Her office was always spotless, her schedule always full, yet there were moments when she would glance at the photograph of her mother and feel an ache that no amount of success could soothe. Justice had been served, but closure was a more fragile thing. One evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the city in amber light, she found herself walking through the research lab. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and new beginnings. A group of young scientists were working late, laughter drifting through the sterile halls. They didn't notice her standing there watching. For the first time she realized this quiet hum of curiosity and hope was what her mother had wanted all along. "A world where science served truth, not profit, Dr. Monroe?" a young woman called out, snapping her from her thoughts. "We're about to start the final audit for the Monroe Protocol. Would you like to oversee it?" India smiled. "No, you go ahead. This belongs to all of you now." The woman nodded respectfully, unaware that the same name she now wore on her badge had once been whispered in boardrooms as a threat. Later that night, alone in her penthouse apartment, India poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the window. The city lights shimmered like a constellation below her, but she wasn't looking at them. On her phone screen was an email, one she'd read 100 times but never answered, from Preston Ashford. Subject: "I need to see you." He had written from prison a few months before his release. His words were short, restrained. He wanted to apologize, he said, to explain, but she had ignored every message, every attempt, until now. Her finger hovered over reply, then dropped to the table. Some wounds didn't heal with words. Some simply faded into scars, reminders of who you used to be. Still, that night she dreamed of him. Not as the man who betrayed her, but as the man he might have been before his family poisoned him with privilege. When she woke, she didn't feel anger. Just an echo of something that used to be love. The next morning, India received a letter at her office. No return address. The handwriting was familiar, steady, precise. She opened it carefully. "Miss Monroe," it began. "I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope you know that I loved you, even if everything I did was wrong. The prison psychologist says redemption is found in truth. So here's mine. I knew your mother long before you did. She worked directly under my father. I was 10 years old when she gave me a tour of the lab. She told me the truth even then, that science is nothing without conscience. I didn't understand it until I watched you stand where she once stood. I think part of me fell in love with her courage, and the rest with you, because you carry it. Whatever happens to me next, know that you saved more lives than you'll ever count, and that somewhere, in the small part of me that still belongs to something good, I'm proud of you." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. India folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer, next to her mother's photo. She whispered a quiet goodbye, not just to Preston, but to the girl she'd once been, the one who believed that love could fix everything. Weeks later, the Diane Monroe Foundation opened its first major research fellowship. Hundreds of applications poured in from foster youth who dreamed of becoming scientists, advocates, and reformers. India read each one herself, staying up late into the night. Their stories felt like pieces of her own. Children who had been forgotten, now daring to believe in something bigger. One name caught her eye. Elijah Carter, age 18, foster child, Detroit. His essay began simply. "My mom died from a medication that was supposed to help her. I want to make sure no one else's mom ever dies because the truth was buried." India's breath caught. She closed her eyes and smiled through the sting of tears. "You got it, Elijah," she whispered. "You're in." The foundation's work spread faster than anyone expected. Universities partnered with it. Former whistleblowers reached out, offering mentorship. The press called India the woman who rebuilt a broken industry. But she hated that phrase. She hadn't rebuilt the industry. She'd just forced it to look in the mirror. On the anniversary of her mother's death, India visited the grave for the first time since uncovering the truth. The sky was gray, the air sharp with winter's edge. She knelt, brushing snow from the stone that read, "Diane Monroe, 1969-1998. She told the truth. The world wasn't ready. India placed a single white rose on the grave. "They know now, Mom," she said softly. "The world's finally listening." As she stood, a small voice behind her said, "Are you India Monroe?" She turned. A woman in her 50s stood a few feet away, holding a little girl's hand. The child clutched a worn teddy bear, its fur matted from love. "My son worked at Ashford," the woman said. "He was one of the victims of that drug. We lost our first child because of it, but because of what you did, my grandson was born healthy. Thank you." India felt her throat tighten. She crouched down to the little girl's level. "What's your name?" "Diana," the girl said shyly. India smiled. "That's a beautiful name." When they left, India stood for a long time, the winter wind tugging at her coat, tears freezing on her cheeks. For the first time, her mother's grave didn't feel like a place of loss. It felt like a place of legacy. As months rolled into years, the world began to change in ways small and large. Pharmaceutical companies around the globe adopted the Monroe Protocol. Lawmakers pushed through the Monroe Act, granting legal protection and financial security to whistleblowers across industries. For once, truth was no longer a liability. It was the foundation. India rarely spoke about what happened at the Ashford mansion. When journalists asked how she'd found the strength to confront them, she always gave the same answer. Because silence costs lives. She never mentioned the nightmares that still woke her sometimes. The sound of Margaret's cold voice, the flash of her mother's photograph under lamplight, the echo of Preston's apology. But when those dreams came, she would rise, light a candle by the window, and whisper to the night, "I'm still here, and I'm still speaking." On her 10th anniversary as chief ethics officer, the company's board presented her with a gift, a framed plaque engraved with words she'd spoken during her first congressional testimony. Justice isn't revenge. It's responsibility. She hung it beside her mother's photograph. That night, she stayed late in her office, reviewing the next phase of the Monroe Protocol. The city lights outside flickered like tiny stars. Jerome called her one last time before retiring for good. "You've done more than anyone ever thought possible, India," he said. "How does it feel to have changed the world?" India smiled faintly. "It doesn't feel like I changed it," she said. "It feels like I just helped it remember what it was supposed to be." After the call, she stepped out onto the balcony, breathing in the cold air. Below, the city pulsed with life. Cars, lights, laughter. Every sound was proof that she had survived, that truth had survived. She took her mother's photo from her pocket and held it up against the skyline. "You see, Mom?" she whispered. "We made it." For a moment the wind stilled. A single snowflake landed on the frame and melted slowly, like a tear. India smiled. Then she turned back toward the office lights, toward the future her mother had died believing in. Because sometimes, the most powerful legacy isn't vengeance or victory, it's healing. It's the quiet, unstoppable grace of a woman who refused to stay buried.